He was just, we was not in a very good space and place, and obviously you could see it.
If I could get those 2 days back.
The same thing that happened to my daughter is what happened to Whitney.
At 56, the tragedy of Bobby Brown is beyond heartbreaking. For over 3 decades, Bobby Brown has buried more family members than most people could survive, watching helplessly as the same demons that once consumed him destroyed everyone he loved most.
We just learned that you started the group.
Mm-hmm.
And they kicked you out.
Kicked me out of my own
group.
Of my own group.
He was the former Golden Boy, whose ego was too big to work with his bandmates, but whose talent was undeniable.
Just, I would not show up at all or show up late and go out there, do what I do, and not care about what anybody else thought,
What happened to Bobby Brown is the story of a man who survived everything except watching his children die. So let's get into it. 12-year-old Bobby Brown was already causing problems in New Edition before most people even knew his name. In the Roxbury housing projects of Boston, where gunshots were more common than opportunity, Bobby had found something that made him special. A voice that could make girls scream and dance moves that defied gravity. But even at that young age, the hunger for attention that would define and destroy his life was already burning too bright. The group that would become New Edition formed in 1978 around Bobby's magnetic energy. While Ralph Tresvant had the prettier voice and Michael Bivins had the business sense, Bobby Brown was pure electricity on stage. He couldn't just sing his parts and hit his marks like the other boys. He had to own every moment, extend every solo, and turn every performance into his personal showcase. From the beginning, Bobby was different. Where the other members followed choreography, Bobby improvised. Where they stayed in formation, Bobby broke free to interact with the female fans who couldn't take their eyes off him. His signature move, the pelvic thrust that would later become his trademark, was already causing controversy when he was barely a teenager.
I wouldn't wear drawers on stage. I don't know.
You wouldn't wear drawers on stage?
It was part of my spiel.
The sexual energy that Bobby brought to their performances was both New Edition's secret weapon and their biggest liability. Record executives loved how he could electrify a crowd, but parents worried about his influence on their daughters. At 13, Bobby was already being censored by television producers who found his dancing too suggestive for family programming. Behind the scenes, Bobby's personality was even more challenging than his stage presence. He questioned everything: why Ralph got more solos, why certain songs were chosen, why they had to follow rules that seemed designed to limit his natural charisma. The other group members started to see him as difficult, but Bobby saw himself as the only one willing to fight for their collective success. The pressure of being New Edition's most controversial member was amplifying every difficult aspect of Bobby's personality. His mood swings became more extreme, his defiance more pronounced, and his need for control more desperate. Studio sessions that should have been collaborative became battlegrounds where Bobby fought to expand his role in every song.
Looking like a natural queen. I said, let me take you for a ride.
Record label executives were beginning to notice the tension within the group. While New Edition's success was undeniable, Bobby's behavior was becoming a liability that threatened their carefully cultivated, wholesome image. Phone calls were being made behind closed doors about how to handle their most talented but most problematic member. The breaking point was inevitable. Bobby's need to be the star was fundamentally incompatible with being part of a group where everyone was supposed to be equal. Every performance brought him closer to the confrontation that would change everything. Not just for him, but for every member of New Edition. The stage was literally being set for one of the most infamous moments in boy band history. A fight that would be seen by thousands of fans and change the trajectory of 6 young lives forever. Bobby Brown was about to learn that being the most talented person in the room doesn't always mean you get to stay in the room.
I would not show up at all or show up late and go out there, do what I do, and not care about what anybody else thought, you know.
The Oakland Coliseum was supposed to be just another stop on New Edition's 1985 tour, but it became the night that Bobby Brown's life split into before and after. As the group prepared to perform their hit, Cool It Now, Bobby made a decision that would cost him everything he had worked for since childhood. He decided to delay the song's opening to milk the crowd's energy for just a few more seconds. Michael Bivins had reached his breaking point with Bobby's ego-driven antics. When Bobby stepped out of formation, yet again, refusing to start the song on cue, Bivins snapped. In front of thousands of screaming fans, the two teenagers began throwing punches on stage, their choreographed harmony dissolving into raw violence as their group members tried to separate them. The fight was over in seconds, but the damage was permanent. Backstage, their manager Gary Evans saw an opportunity to solve what he viewed as the Bobby Brown problem. Evans had been fielding complaints from record executives, tour promoters, and even the other group members about Bobby's increasingly erratic behavior. The onstage brawl gave him the ammunition he needed. Within days, Evans called a meeting that would become one of the most controversial moments in music history. He told the remaining 4 members of New Edition that they had to make a choice. They could continue dealing with Bobby's disruptions, or they could vote him out of the group and save their careers. The manager painted Bobby as a liability who was jeopardizing everyone's future with his selfishness and lack of professionalism. The vote was supposed to be secret, but the result was devastating. Michael Bivins, Ronnie DeVoe, Ricky Bell, and Ralph Tresvant all voted to remove Bobby from the group he had helped create. Even Ralph, who had tried to stay neutral in most conflicts, felt that Bobby's behavior had become impossible to manage. The decision was unanimous and final.
We just learned that you started the group.
Mm-hmm.
And they kicked you out.
Kicked me out of my own
group.
Of my own group.
Bobby learned about his removal through a phone call that lasted less than 3 minutes. Years later, he would describe it as the moment his childhood died. The group that had been his family, his identity, and his entire world had chosen to continue without him. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound because it came from the people he had trusted most. The official story was that Bobby had decided to pursue a solo career, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. New Edition had fired their most dynamic performer because they couldn't control him. For a 16-year-old who had never known life without the group, the rejection was devastating on a level that would take decades to fully understand. The other members tried to convince themselves they had made the right choice, but privately, some of them wondered if they had just destroyed the very thing that made New Edition special. Bobby's energy, his charisma, his willingness to take risks. These weren't just personality flaws. They were the qualities that had made their group different from every other boy band.
Bobby Brown.
Well, what happened is Bobby, he was really uncomfortable with the style of singing that we had. He wanted to get into something where he could be himself and be comfortable at the same time.
As Bobby packed his belongings and prepared to leave the only life he had ever known, the weight of rejection was already beginning to transform into something darker. The pain of being voted out by his closest friends would fuel a rage that would drive him to success, but it would also plant the seeds of the self-destructive behavior that would eventually consume everyone he loved. The industry was about to discover that kicking Bobby Brown out of New Edition hadn't solved anyone's problems. It had just given his demons room to grow. Bobby Brown's solo career exploded with a fury that shocked everyone who had written him off after New Edition. His 1988 album, Don't Be Cruel, didn't just succeed, it dominated, producing 5 top 10 hits and establishing Bobby as the undisputed king of New Jack Swing. But the same rebellious energy that made him a superstar was already poisoning every aspect of his personal life. The success was intoxicating but isolating. Bobby was suddenly making more money than his former group members combined, selling out arenas where New Edition had once struggled to fill theaters. The vindication felt sweet, but it came with a price that 19-year-old Bobby couldn't have anticipated. Fame at that level was a 24-hour prison where every movement was scrutinized and every mistake was magnified. Tour performances became increasingly erratic as Bobby's need to prove himself drove him to more extreme behavior. The pelvic thrusts that had gotten him in trouble as a teenager were now full sexual simulations that got him arrested in multiple cities. Local authorities would show up at his concerts with handcuffs, treating his performances like public indecency exhibitions rather than musical events. Behind the scenes, Bobby was already experimenting with the substances that would later destroy his life. The pressure of being a solo artist was exponentially greater than anything he had experienced in New Edition. Every decision, every creative choice, every business move was his responsibility alone. The weight of that independence was crushing for someone who had never learned healthy coping mechanisms. Relationships became impossible to navigate as Bobby's fame attracted people who wanted to use him rather than know him. Women threw themselves at him not because they loved Bobby Brown the person, but because they were attracted to Bobby Brown the celebrity. The loneliness of being desired for all the wrong reasons was driving him toward increasingly reckless behavior. The money was flowing faster than Bobby could spend it, but financial success couldn't fill the emotional void left by his ejection from New Edition. Deep down, he was still the rejected teenager who had been voted out by his best friends. No amount of solo success could heal that wound, so he began numbing it with alcohol and drugs that were easily available in the music industry. Studio sessions became all-night parties where creative work mixed with chemical experimentation. Bobby was surrounded by people who enabled his worst impulses because his success was making them rich. Nobody wanted to be the person who told the golden goose to slow down, even when it was obvious that his behavior was becoming dangerous. The touring lifestyle was particularly toxic for someone with Bobby's addictive personality. Different city every night, different drugs available in every location, and no consequences that couldn't be bought off with money or influence. The combination of unlimited access and unlimited resources was creating a perfect storm of self-destruction.
We was not in a very good space and place, and obviously you could see it.
By the time Bobby realized he was using drugs to cope rather than party, the addiction had already taken hold. What had started as weekend experimentation was becoming daily necessity. The man who had fought so hard to prove he didn't need New Edition was discovering that he couldn't function without chemical assistance. The success that was supposed to validate his decision to go solo was actually proving that his former group members might have been right about his inability to handle success responsibly. When Bobby Brown met Whitney Houston at the 1989 Soul Train Music Awards, neither of them could have predicted they were about to begin one of the most destructive love affairs in entertainment history. Whitney was America's sweetheart, the angelic voice who represented everything pure about pop music. Bobby was the bad boy whose reputation for controversy made him the perfect villain for their fairy tale romance. The attraction was immediate and dangerous. Whitney had spent her entire career being the perfect pop princess, controlled by record executives and family members who managed every aspect of her public image. Bobby represented freedom from that suffocating perfection. He was raw, honest, and unapologetically himself in ways that Whitney envied and desired.
Whitney, forget all these people, okay? They're trying to make you be what they want you to be. You don't owe anybody anything. You're wonderful.
Their courtship was conducted in the spotlight, with every date and every appearance analyzed by media outlets that treated their relationship like a sociological experiment. Could the good girl really tame the bad boy? Would Bobby's street credibility survive dating a pop princess? The questions revealed more about America's racial and class prejudices than they did about the actual people involved. Behind the scenes, Whitney and Bobby were discovering they had more in common than anyone realized. Both had grown up under intense pressure to perform. Both struggled with the isolation that came with fame, and both were already using substances to cope with stress that would have broken most people. Their shared addiction was initially hidden beneath the passion of new love. The 1992 wedding was a spectacle that seemed designed more for public consumption than personal joy. Whitney's family was openly skeptical of Bobby, viewing him as beneath her social status and potentially damaging to her career. Bobby's friends couldn't understand why he would want to marry someone whose wholesome image was so different from his authentic self. On their wedding day, Bobby revealed later, he discovered that Whitney's perfect image was as much of a performance as his bad boy persona. While locked in a bathroom dealing with his own pre-wedding anxiety and drug use, he witnessed Whitney snorting cocaine. The first time he saw the woman behind the public mask.
Well, that was the first time I had actually saw her do drugs.
Cocaine.
Yes, ma'am.
The revelation was both shocking and bonding, as they realized they were both hiding similar secrets. The early years of marriage were a delicate balance between their public personas and private realities. Whitney was trying to maintain her image as America's sweetheart, while dealing with a husband whose very existence challenged that narrative. Bobby was attempting to mature into a responsible husband, while fighting every instinct that had made him famous. Their daughter, Bobby Christina, was born in 1993, and for a brief period, parenthood seemed to stabilize both of them. They had something to focus on besides their careers and their substances.
Bobby Christina, just wanna say, clap your hands. Say it again. Bobby Christina, just wanna say, clap your hands.
But the pressure of raising a child in the public eye, combined with their individual struggles with addiction, began to create new forms of stress that neither was equipped to handle. The marriage that had seemed like a fairy tale to outsiders was becoming a nightmare behind closed doors. Two people who had never learned healthy ways to cope with pain were now dealing with the pain of watching someone they loved self-destruct. Their love was real, but it wasn't strong enough to overcome the demons they had brought into the relationship. The foundation was being laid for a tragedy that would eventually consume not just Bobby and Whitney, but the innocent child they were raising in an environment that was becoming increasingly unstable and dangerous. The 2005 Bravo reality show, Being Bobby Brown, was supposed to rehabilitate Bobby's public image by showing the world who he really was behind the headlines. Instead, it became a grotesque exhibition that destroyed what remained of both his and Whitney's dignity, turning their private dysfunction into public entertainment for millions of viewers who couldn't look away from the train wreck.
Seen worse. I had to dig a dookie bubble out of your butt.
Okay, all right.
The decision to allow cameras into their home was made during a particularly desperate period in Bobby's career. His music wasn't selling, his tours were poorly attended, and his legal troubles were mounting. The reality show seemed like an opportunity to remind the world why they had once loved him, while also generating much-needed income to support his growing family and expensive lifestyle. Whitney's participation was the key to getting the show approved, but it was also the beginning of the end for her carefully maintained public image. For 20 years, she had been America's sweetheart, but Being Bobby Brown revealed a woman who was profane, volatile, and obviously struggling with substance abuse. The cameras captured her in moments that no publicist could have prepared for or explained away.
He's tripping. I'm about to drop it on the ground.
The show's most infamous moments became cultural touchstones that defined how America remembered Whitney Houston. Her "kiss my ass" outbursts, her erratic behavior, and her obvious intoxication in multiple episodes shattered the illusion that she was anything other than a deeply troubled woman married to an equally troubled man. The fairy tale was officially dead. The reality show that was supposed to save Bobby's career had instead provided a detailed documentary of how fame, addiction, and enabling could destroy not just individuals, but entire families. The entertainment industry had found a new way to profit from human suffering, and Bobby and Whitney had been willing participants in their own exploitation. The final years of Bobby and Whitney's marriage became a desperate game of survival, where love and addiction fought a daily battle that could only end in destruction. By 2004, both were so deep in their substance abuse that normal life had become impossible, and their daughter Bobby Christina was essentially raising herself while her parents descended into complete dysfunction.
Crack rehab fails.
First of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay?
Whitney's transformation from America's sweetheart to a woman who couldn't get through an interview without appearing intoxicated was heartbreaking to witness. Her once pristine voice was destroyed by years of smoking crack and cocaine abuse, and her physical appearance had deteriorated to the point where magazine covers focused on her weight loss rather than her music. Bobby watched helplessly as the woman he loved disappeared into addiction. Bobby's own drug use had evolved from recreational partying into a full-blown addiction to crack cocaine, heroin, and alcohol. He later admitted that he and Whitney would go on binges that lasted for days, leaving their young daughter to fend for herself while they locked themselves away to get high. The house that should have been a safe haven for Bobby Christina became a nightmare of neglect and chaos. The couple's financial situation was deteriorating as rapidly as their health. Despite having earned tens of millions of dollars throughout their careers, their money was being consumed by drug purchases, legal fees, and the expensive lifestyle they maintained even when their income had virtually disappeared. Bobby was facing multiple arrests for child support violations, DUI charges, and probation violations that kept him cycling in and out of jail.
And now I'm a goddamn joke. I'm a goddamn joke because of you.
Because of me.
Because of your show. You
a joke because of me?
did this to me.
What did I do to you?
You
man?
did this
all I
to
did
me.
was love you. That's all I did.
Are you serious?
Violence had entered their relationship as both Bobby and Whitney's personalities became more volatile under the influence of drugs. The 2003 domestic battery charge, where Bobby was arrested for hitting Whitney and leaving visible injuries on her face, was just one incident that became public. Friends and family members knew there were many more altercations that never resulted in police reports. Their daughter was developing her own coping mechanisms for living in a household where her parents' addiction took priority over her basic needs. Bobby Christina was already showing signs of the trauma that would eventually lead her down the same destructive path as her parents. She was learning that love and pain were inseparable, and that chaos was normal. Bobby's 2004 jail sentence for probation violations became an unexpected blessing when it forced him into sobriety for the first time in years. During his time in Broward County Jail, the drugs left his system and he began to see clearly how completely his life had spiraled out of control. The clarity was terrifying and necessary.
That was the last candle to blow out. I realized that I had been doing drugs for over 15 years of my life, and I was only a certain age, and it was just like, this is going to kill me.
When Whitney picked Bobby up from jail, she had drugs waiting in the car, expecting him to immediately resume their shared addiction. But Bobby was different after his forced sobriety. For the first time, he wanted to get clean and stay clean, and he desperately wanted Whitney to join him in recovery. Her refusal to stop using marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. The tragedy was that their love was still real and powerful, but it was no longer enough to overcome the drugs that controlled both of their lives. Bobby's sobriety created a dynamic where he could see clearly how sick Whitney had become, while she felt judged and abandoned by the one person who had always understood her darkness. The marriage that had survived public scrutiny, financial problems, and family opposition was finally being destroyed by the one thing that had initially bonded them: their shared addiction. When only one person in a codependent relationship gets clean, the relationship itself becomes impossible to maintain. February 11th, 2012 should have been just another day in Bobby Brown's journey toward redemption, but it became the day that changed everything when a phone call informed him that Whitney Houston had been found dead in a Beverly Hills hotel bathtub. The woman he had loved and lost was gone forever, and Bobby's world collapsed in ways that no amount of sobriety could have prepared him for. Whitney's death was officially ruled an accidental drowning caused by atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use. But Bobby knew the real cause was the broken heart that had never healed after their divorce. Despite their turbulent relationship, they had remained connected by their shared history and their daughter. Her death felt like losing a piece of his own soul that could never be replaced.
3 years after her famous mother.
If I could get those 2 days back.
3 years later, the unthinkable happened again. On January 31st, 2015, Bobby Christina was found unconscious in a bathtub in her Roswell, Georgia townhouse, in circumstances eerily similar to her mother's death. The 22-year-old had a toxic mix of drugs and alcohol in her system, and she would spend the next 6 months in a coma before dying on July 26, 2015. Bobby's grief over losing his daughter was beyond description.
The same thing that happened to my daughter is what happened to Whitney.
Bobby Christina had been his baby girl, the child he had tried desperately to protect from the chaos that had consumed his marriage to Whitney. Watching her follow the same destructive path as her mother felt like a cosmic punishment for every mistake he had ever made as a father and husband. The similarities between Whitney and Bobby Christina's deaths were too striking to be coincidental. Both had been found in bathtubs, both had drugs in their systems, and both had been in relationships with men who Bobby believed had enabled their drug use. He became convinced that Nick Gordon, Bobby Christina's boyfriend, had played a role in both deaths by providing drugs to the 2 women Bobby loved most. The surviving members of his family watched helplessly as Bobby's sobriety was tested by grief that would have driven most people back to drugs and alcohol. The man who had fought so hard to overcome his own addiction was now facing the ultimate test of his recovery, while dealing with pain that seemed designed to destroy whatever strength he had left. November 18, 2020, brought Bobby Brown the kind of phone call that no parent should ever receive. His son, Bobby Brown Jr., was found dead in his Los Angeles apartment at age 28, killed by an overdose of alcohol, cocaine, and fentanyl.
Bobby Brown's son, Bobby Jr., has passed away at the age of 28.
For a man who had already buried his ex-wife and daughter to similar circumstances, losing another child to drugs felt like a cosmic punishment that would never end. The weight of surviving when everyone he loved had died was crushing Bobby in ways that sobriety couldn't protect him from. He had been clean from drugs for 20 years and sober from alcohol for 2 years, but staying alive while watching his children die was a different kind of hell that no recovery program had prepared him for. The survivor's guilt was eating him alive. At 56, Bobby Brown had become a walking memorial to the people he had failed to save. Whitney, Bobby Christina, and Bobby Jr. were all gone, victims of the same addiction and lifestyle that Bobby had somehow managed to escape. The randomness of who lives and who dies in the grip of addiction was a mystery that haunted him every day he remained breathing. The entertainment industry that had once celebrated Bobby's talent now viewed him as a tragic figure whose very presence reminded people of all the loss and destruction that fame could bring. Interviews became grief counseling sessions where Bobby was expected to provide wisdom about surviving trauma, as if being the last one standing made him qualified to explain why bad things happen to good people. His current marriage to Alicia Etheridge provided stability and love, but it couldn't erase the pain of watching his children from previous relationships die before him. The 3 children he shared with Alicia were growing up in the shadow of their deceased siblings, knowing that addiction was the family legacy they would have to actively fight against for the rest of their lives. Bobby's relationship with his surviving children had become intensely protective and fearful. Every phone call that came too late at night triggered panic attacks. Every time one of his kids was unreachable for a few hours, Bobby's mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. The trauma of losing 3 family members to drugs had left him hyper-vigilant and anxious about everyone he loved. The fortune he had earned during his successful years was now largely consumed by grief and legal fees, wrongful death lawsuits, medical bills from Whitney and Bobby Christina's final months, and the cost of trying to keep his surviving family safe had drained most of his resources. Success felt meaningless when it couldn't buy the only things that mattered: time with the people he had lost. Public appearances had become exercises in maintaining composure while discussing the worst moments of his life. Bobby was expected to be inspirational about overcoming addiction while simultaneously grieving losses that addiction had caused. The contradiction was exhausting, but it was also his only remaining connection to a public that had once loved his music. The Bobby Brown who had once been New Edition's most dynamic performer was now a 56-year-old man whose greatest achievement was simply staying alive and sober while everyone around him died. His story had become a cautionary tale about the price of fame, but it was also a testament to the possibility of survival when survival seems impossible. The legacy that Bobby would leave wasn't just his music or his influence on New Jack Swing. It was proof that even the most damaged people can choose recovery, even when recovery means living with pain that never goes away. His tragedy wasn't that he had lost everything, but that he had survived to remember what he had lost, carrying that weight for whatever time he had left. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.